So this is just 16:25 hours GMT, that is 4:25 p.m. so-called British Standard Time in London, within quotation marks, UK, on Sunday the 28th of November 2021. And this is the KHOODEELAAR television channel being broadcast only on the internet. Now, the stupidest and the most insulting image of the liar with this picture of his hand on his head. This is a contrivance. This is a complete dishonest display. That shows him as being serious, being worried, and even with a conscience. All of this pretense is fabricated by the congenital liar. Because that and this other picture, which is in the lying legacy of Beaverbrook, doesn't go with the evidence of the liars. Look at the various angles. The liars in Fleet Street are complying with presenting this liar with this kind of picture. Where is this? Is the one. This is completely false. Putting his hand on his head in that way. And this is the daily scar on Sunday. I mean, these are platforms of stupidity, dishonesty, fabrication, falsehood, and lying, immorality, cruelty. On page 2 of this scar on Sunday, they're continuing the pretense, and it is so sick. What kind of country is Britain or the United Kingdom? Because these accounts, some of the accounts published by the most corrupt Fleet Street, says that claims that the victims of the massacre on the Channel, of course, only a few handful maybe so far, have been identified and traced, and some of the mainstream, like the Sky News, have claimed that they have sent reporters to Iraq and to the Iraqi, kind of Iraq-linked Kurdistan, from where most of these victims of the massacre, this massacre, come from. And the account the Sky News has published so far that I have seen is that none of the families of the victims, they of course don't name all of them, but generally they're referring to the victims of the massacre and saying that the families and the relatives or relations that these people have allegedly, the Sky News people have allegedly visited and spoken to, are not angry. We shall discuss that anger in terms of emotion later. And other accounts have said that despite the fact that the people who have been kind of reported in the statement, in making the statements, that despite the fact that they are friends or acquaintances or relatives or members of their families or close kind of people that know they have been close to, some of them have lost their lives or have lost their lives. Despite that, these people say that they will try themselves to cross the channel in the same way. Now, this is not just unbelievable. This is fabricated and distorted on any number of levels. And we shall be talking about the distortion at the levels. Now, about the concept of emotion, the Guardian-controlled Observer magazine today, Sunday, the 28th of November, has a propaganda piece for the outgoing presenter on Channel 4 News, John Slow. Now, I call him John Slow, S-L-O-W. I have been calling him John Slow based entirely on the evidence of his backwardness. Now, this is the guy who has been overhyped. I call him backward, but he has been overhyped by the kind of mainstream in Fleet Street and surrounding kind of areas, if you like. And a few years ago, either on Channel 4 or a similar outlet, there was a slot where two women, these are two women, that one is Sue Parkin and her colleague, and they had as their kind of guests on that occasion the BBC's Radio 4 Today program presenter John Humphreys, the racist from Wales, and John Snow, that is John Slow. And one of them, either Sue Parkin or Sue Parkins, her name I have to check the spelling of, called these two, John Slow and John Humphreys, gods in the media. Now that was, and it is now even worse, but it was at least 10 years ago, if not longer. And there was absolutely no evidence. There was absolutely no evidence in which to elevate, even rhetorically, the status of these two absolutely unfit for purpose individuals, and to refer to them as gods. Now that is an indication of the corruption, nepotism, and mutual, if you like, admiration that dominates the mainstream media, including Fleet Street. And today's Mail on Sunday, quite apart from the piece in the Observer that we shall go back to about John Slow, confessing that he has been always emotional, and to him, being emotional is a good thing. Now, Of course, it is a truthful statement that every individual has to have emotion, an emotional kind of aspect to their personality and their character. And this is part of human being, human nature, and other creations, creatures. Now, one of the things that John Slow does or has done as presenter of the Channel 4 is to have guests, of course, guests and plants guests. And the young English singer appeared on his program. And the way he spoke to her, to me, it came across as patronizing in the extreme. So objectively, I took exception to that and I posted something critical about his behavior. Now, remember the reaction of racist women in the media and so-called politics. I mean, these racists use or abuse their gender in order to mount racist attacks and slurs and so on. We shall discuss that at another time. I have discussed it before, but I shall discuss that another time in a contextual update. So this particular English singer then posted on her social media account an over-the-top praise and admiration of John Slow. Instead of being grateful that he had actually patronized her and I had posted something objectively in solidarity. I don't know this person, but the interview or the interaction came across as John Slow doing what he does. So the fact that she actually reacted by publicly praising him instead of noting my statement in solidarity with her is the kind of racism that goes on every single day. Because she was racistly making the point of opposing what I had said, even though what I had said was to stand up for her as a person, as a, quote, artist. And this is not just Azim Rafiq coming across as a one-off kind of target of racism and racist denial. This is what happened in the new SS, when the new SS had a period in the early 1990s, edited by one of the racists. Of course, all the editors of the New Statesman have been racists. But this particular one published a thing about an aspect of society and an aspect of political situation. And it had been either bylined to Mark Tully or had referred to Mark Tully, and the Australian racist criminal or Australian-born racist criminal. And that Australian-born racist criminal always reacts to any comment about his activities by questioning the rationality and the sanity of the person criticizing him. a tactic that Ken Lying Still Livingston does as well, a tactic that the Stalinists do, and a tactic that the fascists do as well. Fascists, Stalinists have got this thing in common. Many things they have in common, but this one, anyone who is critical of them, rationally, objectively, must be out of their minds. That is what they use to kind of respond to criticism that is otherwise valid, factually valid, evidentially valid, morally valid. I mean, John Humphreys and John Slow were called by Sue Perkins or her colleague, partner in business for quite a while, gods. These people are supposed to be secular. These people are supposed to be rational. And yet there were the two women supposed to be feminists as well. Most brazenly and shamelessly and without any dignity whatsoever, worshipping these two men who are far from gods, deities. Now, looking back at John Slow over the years that he has been fronting Channel 4 News, it's absolutely clear that John Slow only kept his post or position at Channel 4 News by parading himself as an almost kind of intelligent and moral kind of presenter. I mean, John Slow has been in the USA doing the presidential so-called elections. Nothing he said, nothing, absolutely nothing he said made any moral stand, moral explanation against racism and against corruption of the American presidential election and the entailed baggage. And the same applies to John Slow's coverage of the Brexit, run up to the Brexit. And it's completely, absolutely, way short of telling the truth, let alone expressing any traceable evidence of prescience. Everything that our campaign has said about Brexit has been vindicated, as we have been vindicated on everything else we say, because that is what we do, tell the truth. And we don't state or publish or utter anything that is in any way linked with any party or partisan ideology. And this piece by The Observer about John Slow is coinciding with the Sunday Times culture bulletin or supplement, marking George Clooney at 60. Turning 60 is a bummer, but it's that or death. Now, these people, John Slow and George Clooney, these are paraded to the many by Fleet Street and by their associated counterparts in the broadcasting kind of platforms as deities, as semi-gods or almost gods. Nothing that John Slow has broadcast, nothing that John Slow has broadcast in his entire time as fronter of Channel 4 News has actually constituted evidence of what can be called breaking story or breaking investigation at all. And although he has it's really ridiculous. The fact that he is married to an African woman is mentioned as he is being married to an African woman, just like David Bowie. What does it have anything to do with it? But the parade, like Jeremy Corbyn's adultery with Diane Abbott, was celebrated as an achievement, as a conquest. And during the first 2 years of Corbyn's incumbency as, quote, leader of the Labour Party, the Daily Mail Group published several items about Corbyn having this adulterous relationship with Diane Abbott. Why do they do that? Diane Abbott is a physically black woman, but all her, quotes, promoters or admirers happen to be white. They don't talk about that. She got married to an African man, black man, Thompson, by whom she produced a black child. But that's it. Thompson never has featured in Diane Abbott's political conversations or political interpretations. Isn't that odd? Because she was put as the front runner in the Labour Party's racist project of black section. Those in the black section platform have always denied my analysis. My analysis has always been from the beginning that it was a racist project. It wasn't an anti-racist black section. And we shall come to that shortly again. Because all the achievements of Barney Grant, who was one of the black section intake, all his achievements, they have not lasted, have they? What were the achievements? His most often publicized role just before he got in, I think, was the statement that he made, reportedly, the police had got a bloody good hiding. Saying that means nothing. Absolutely nothing. If such a statement is not followed by in-depth engagement about the role of the police in relation to the rights of the people affected by the attacks on black community by the police, which is what the Broadwater Farm so-called riots was supposedly about, in the middle of which Barney Grant reportedly said that the police had got a bloody good hiding. Nothing that Barney Grant said on the record after he became MP, after that, black section MP, let's say, constitutes substance or substantial opposition to racism in parliament, racism beyond parliament. And Barney Grant did not solidarize with the black community after the election that saw him and the other three enter the House of Commons. And this applies to all the black linked careers. Now, I mean, Keith Sleeves Vaz is not from an African background. He is from the subcontinent, India. So if Sleeves Vaz can call himself black section member, then it follows that everyone else from the subcontinent is a black section kind of eligible. And yet, this is denied elsewhere, as well as by the African origin individuals. It has been denied by Sleeves Vaz himself. Sleeves Vaz, Paul Boateng, Barney Grant, and Diana Abbott, these four black sectionists, have not produced anything of any significance about the plight of the victims of racism in this country, or the way forward for representation against racist obstruction for the establishment of the rights of the black community, including Asians and Africans. So, what's the point of talking about John Slow being married to an African woman? That's the question. And during the 1980s, middle of 1980s, there was a magazine called She that revealed that Diane Abbott had told it that her best half hour was spent in a place in the Cotswolds in England where she had wild sex with a man. She didn't name him at the time, and it's still not clear whether it was Corbyn or somebody else, but it was a white man. That is, and everything that John MacDonald has said in the piece that has been published in the last few days about Diane Abbott, praising Diane Abbott, everything that piece says about Diane Abbott is contrived. And there is no sign of a single white person in the gallery of her admirers, as reported by that particular promotion. It calls Diane Abbott attractive, and it calls her intelligent and all the other things. But nothing that Diane Abbott has done since 1987, when she got in as an MP, black section MP, nothing that she has done has included, well, it has not included any direct reference to the struggle against racism at any level initiated by, carried out by, and conducted by, and continued by the black community. And this is the piece I'm holding in the Sunday Times Culture magazine of November 28th, that is today, 2021. And this piece is bylined by Waldemar Januszczak. Now, Waldemar Januszczak is of Polish origin, and Januszczak is spelled J, not A. So Januszczak. Waldemar Januszczak was involved with Channel 4 at the beginning, and he had his kind of 15 minutes of fame. But Januszczak has got this piece about the artists, retrospective at the Tate Gallery, etc. But Januszczak, who was praised by Tariq Ali, who, like Diana, but doesn't know any Asian people apart from himself. And he's the guest. He is a kind of given a patronized platform by the racist left. Just like Diana Abbott has been given a guest platform by the racists on the left, whether they coincide with those particular racists that patronize Tariq Ali is not certain. But Boris Johnson's recent critic, Michael Heseltine, is a friend of Tariq Ali's. So that gives the picture. Ordinary black people, ordinary people fighting ordinary racism are not recognized. And that is the point I'm making about the emotional kind of claim that John Slow has made. He may be emotional, but he should not be putting it across as if he is the only one on the planet Earth that has any emotion. Every single human being is made of emotion. Some people suppress the emotion, others disguise them, but everyone has got emotion. Emotion is part of being alive. I mean, whether the emotion is morally consistent is another matter, but emotion there is in every human being. And as a person who has absolutely unlimited emotional attachment to kittens, squirrels, bunnies, I can say quite without any qualification that these creatures that I've mentioned, there are some of them, but there are 18,000 creatures according to the Holy Quran, 18,000 different species, that is. And there is no other account of how many creatures or species there are. So the reference to the Holy Quran is because of that. And according to the Islamic faith, all these creatures, the 18,000 species, let's say, according to the Quran, have been created by God, whose kind of couriers of whose message and mission are human beings. And the reference to the 18,000 creatures or species is in that context that the creator, that is God, has created these species as complements to human beings so that human beings can do the right thing do the right thing, not the wrong thing. And there is nothing, there is no record of John Slow or John Humphreys or the hundreds of their likes, if you like, or their kind of hundreds of their ilk, let's say. Likes can be a misleading word because of the social media. Think or like something. There is nothing that either Humphreys or Slow has done to recognize compassion independently, consistently, universally. Recognize compassion and the central position of compassion in society in the long careers that both of them had. For example, there is nothing in the records of Humphreys or John Slow that has challenged the lack of compassion, which is cruelty, evil, and depravity, as practiced and peddled and spewed and engaged in by the likes of Boris Johnson. When he was challenged to reflect on his racist incitement and hatred against Muslim women wearing burqas resembling bank robbers or looking like bank robbers, Johnson spewed his status that is actually nothing to do with the billions of people on the planet Earth. Everyone who is involved in public activities and public life or is in a public position, if they are asked about a comment they have made about other people's status, of other people's denying other people's humanity and their liberty, the first thing they should do is to acknowledge that this has upset people and this has been wrong and so on. And they should withdraw that and apologize to the other person. But Johnson didn't apologize. So when we call these people's murder, the massacre in the channel, we did that on the evidence. And the evidence warrants restating, which is that for the last 2 years or so, the UK's Interior Ministry, that is which is called Home Office. The Interior Ministry has been engaged in pressurizing the media, pressurizing the local council, the county councils in Kent and Surrey. Both of these are the two biggest county councils in England that are nearest to the other side of the Channel, which is France. And these two councils, county councils, have been complicit with the agenda. Because the agenda has been to terrify and terrorize the migrants into not wanting to, or into not attempting to kind of cross the channel. Now, this program is called world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. That's what I'm doing. And the fact that I'm doing it and is not being done anywhere else is the exclusive beginning. But the contents are also exclusive because no platform exists anywhere that actually does this exclusive diagnosis of the Fleet Street. There is no university, there is no government department, there is no library, there is no faculty nowhere, and no outlet, no television channel or radio station that does anything like what I have been doing and what I do. So it's a world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. First of all, it is something that is not done by anyone else or any other platform. And secondly, the contents are also exclusive. One reason why the contents are exclusive is because there is no party, political or ideological so-called connection with the contents, the output that you are watching. The only basis is the evidence. And the evidence is objective, even though some of the evidence is illustrated by reference or referring to the incident where John Slow's guest, a white English woman singer, was the subject of a comment that I made, objecting to him, patronizing her. But then she reacted typically racistly and typically stupidly and ignorantly by publishing, not long after my kind of condemnation of him, publishing a long dedication to him, almost like repeating Sue Perkins, who called him, and John Slow and John Humphreys. Both of them were called gods by the two women, Sue Perkins and the other one's name I currently am not able to recall, but I shall check that one. So this is Sue Perkins' kind of thing that I'm going to look for. Comment that John Slow and John Humphreys were gods. Sue Perkins and her colleague or partner at the time are among the most high-profile women in the media. Remember the point about feminism. The feminists claim that they are liberating Muslim women from imprisoned lives. This week, Malala Yousafzai has been marking her graduation from the, quote, University of Oxford, 9 years after she was nearly murdered. Now, she has been used as a symbol of the type that no Muslim woman has been given the kind of similar treatment or comparable treatment ever by the Western feminists. And our concept and contextual response to their treatment of Malala Yousafzai has been and is and will continue to be that these feminists are engaged in a crusade against Muslims. Why? Because these feminists are not bothered about the plight of millions of Muslim women in Muslim countries. Poverty, exploitation, violence, and all the rest of it. And what happened to Malala Yousafzai was not a unique incident when she was attacked. Similar attacks are taking place, and many Muslim women have died in Muslim countries in the last 9 years since Malala Yousafzai was rescued by the West and given rehabilitation and a fast track through everything, including getting her a Nobel Prize at such an early age. There is no justice for victims of rape, mass gang rapes, and other violence in Muslim countries. And these very people who are sponsors of Malala Yousafzai are not only silent, but they are adamantly silent about the mass rapes of Muslim women in Muslim countries. Think about that. And I'm thinking about the gang rape of the young woman in Silot in Bangladesh in the MC College, Murari Chand College. Despite the fact that they have been identified, etc., they have not been dealt with, and other Muslim women in Bangladesh have been gang raped since then. So there is nothing in the Western media, nothing in Fleet Street is kind of given any space to these thousands and thousands and thousands of victims of rape in Muslim countries like Bangladesh, including Pakistan. And of course, in terms of size and demography, the number of Muslim young girls being violated, murdered, gang raped in India as part of the faith of the fascistic culture that Modi fronts, indescribable. And these feminists are not talking about that. John Slow is not talking about that. Sue Perkins is not talking about that. So this particular search is being impeded by a technical hitch that is blocking the access to the search site on this device. So we shall update that issue or update on that issue later in due course when we get the access. I don't know why it is not working, but this is what is happening. There is no access to that particular site on this one. The Google is the one that I'm trying to access but cannot access. Don't know why. So we shall check again and see whether we can access this one. Okay, so Sue Perkins often I have mentioned the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. The Library of Congress is one of the Suzanne Elizabeth Perkins, born on 22nd of September 1969. This is the description in the wiki entry on her. Is an English actress, broadcaster, comedian, presenter, and writer. Originally coming to prominence through her comedy partnership with Mel Gidroes in Mel and Sue. This is the other person's name. Melon soup. So she's not being, well, her entry doesn't mention the remark that she made about John Slow. But there is nothing, regardless of whether there is an entry about John Slow or not. She said she's there, quoted, as saying that being a lesbian is about the 47th most interesting thing about her. But there is nothing in her career that can be accessed that is opposing exploitation and violence against women in Muslim countries, Muslim societies, Muslim communities. Well, I have said often that the majority of the Muslim leaders or leadership, including the cabals that control absolutely all the mosques that I know of, are behaving contrary to the actual ethics and injunctions and the purpose of Islam. And there is no mention in Fleet Street about that. Think about that. Because Islam is supposed to be, Islam, the word Islam, the term, the concept of Islam is peace. And yet, today, 28th of November 2021, the majority of Muslim populations, either in Muslim majority countries or in countries such as the UK or North America or in Canada or other countries, in India there are hundreds of millions of Muslims. And the Indian narrative, the agenda in India on politics, arts, culture, education, etc., and judiciary is absent when it comes to Muslims' roles, lives, needs. And of course, Kashmir, which is an absolute Muslim majority country, is occupied by three countries. One is India, the other is Pakistan, and the smallest part is China. But the Kashmiri people are Muslims. And Kashmir, environmentally, naturally, is one of the most beautiful locations on the planet Earth. And all of that is under occupation. And so much about Kashmir is universal, universally, objectively beautiful. And yet, that is not recognized, nor are the peoples of Kashmir recognized, because increasingly every day their objective universal human rights are being taken away from them. That has been the case for 70 plus years, since August 1947. If a fraction of the loss of rights by the Kashmiri people was taking place in any location where the deprivation or the deprived people were not Muslim but of other religions, then that would be something that would be splashed across the Fleet Street papers, etc., etc. Why am I talking about that? Because Dominic Cummings, who has kind of played a role in putting Boris Johnson in his place in the last 1 year, let's say, has bounced back to side with Johnson over the massacre of the migrants in the Channel on last Wednesday. Because Cummings is saying that the problem with the migrants and the attempt by migrants to seek asylum in the UK is linked to the existence of the Human Rights Act. Now that is illogical, factually absolutely untrue, and yet that is what Cummings has said as another stunt to come across a savior of Boris Johnson. And there has been no evidence of any response to Cummings from the opposition. Now, what is the opposition? The opposition in this country is supposed to be contained in the what is called the Labour Party in the House of Commons. There is nothing. There is no sound about that from the Labour Party. Now that's not an exception. Everything about the Johnson cabal is being treated by Keir Starmer as if it doesn't need any comment or engagement from the official so-called opposition, elected opposition. I mean, the latest, objectively speaking, because I'm not a fan of Boris, I'm not a fan of Boris Johnson most certainly, but I'm not a fan of Corbyn either. I mean, over a period of several decades, I have known about Corbyn and I've observed Corbyn, and I never thought that Corbyn is ever even 10% equipped intellectually with the necessary fitness to be the leader of this country. But that doesn't mean that I would ignore attacks on his human rights, that I would ignore the attacks on his democratic rights, which is what Starmer has repeated in the last few days, as reports suggest. Reports say that Starmer would deny Corbyn the opportunity to stand as a Labour Party candidate at the next general election, whenever that is due. And in the same piece or package about that particular obstruction by Starmer against Corbyn, or Corbyn's contested candidature, is a statement saying that Corbyn's supporters think that he can win even if he stood as an independent. And they refer to Ken Lyons to Livingstone standing at the 2000 election, the corrupt post of mayor created by the crook Tony Liar and winning. These are not two comparable situations, because when Livingstone was being barred by Tony Liar from becoming the Labour Party's official candidate for the corrupt post of London mayor, Livingstone was not targeted because of his role in the past as a leader of the Labour Party or as the leader of the Labour Party. He wasn't. He was in the post of leader of the GLC. But being a leader of the GLC did not and cannot be treated as an equal to being the actual leader of the Labour Party itself, which is what Corbyn was. So it would be another item of evidence to substantiate my claim that Starmer is the political murderer of the Labour Party. I mean, how low can you sink? This obstruction to Jeremy Corbyn is intended to push this individual, Corbyn, politically out of existence altogether. I mean, what kind of logic? There is nothing that exists. There is no precedent that can compare with the fact that a leader of the party is being denied even the right to stand as a party leader, party MP for a constituency. The only examples that you can find of this kind of behavior would be in Stalin's kind of regime and in the satellite states within the USSR that Stalin either controlled or influenced. I remember the 1960s treatment of Alexander Dubček by the Stalinists controlling the Russian Empire. I mean, Dubček was in Czechoslovakia, and I was following daily the onslaught on Czechoslovakia, the Prague kind of arrival, 1968. I mean, Dubček was an ordinary intellectual and democratic and fair-minded individual. So when he rejected the Russian kind of Stalinist domination of Czechoslovakia, Dubček was treated as if he had ceased to exist. And the treatment the Stalinists meted out to Alexander Dubček was one of 2 or 3 internationally sensitive and internationally kind of alarming violations of democracy and basic human rights that contributed to the creation in the minds of the base majority of the observers right across the world an awareness of how bad Stalinism was that led to the events that ended that confederation of the Stalinist USSR in the 1980s. It wasn't everyday events, but these symbolic events. This is Alexander Dubček that was treated like that. And the other Alexander Solzhenitsyn, was treated similarly with contempt by the Stalinists. And although Solzhenitsyn went to America, stayed there 20 years and came back to Russia because he found America too corrupt as well. These two Alexanders, their kind of treatment by the Stalinists contributed, without any doubt, singularly, let's say in each case, to the collapse of the myths that the Stalinists were socialists or Democrats, or they were in any way, shape or form doing anything for democratic revolution. And there is nothing in the records of the 70 years from the 1980s, 1917 revolution until the fall of the Stalinist-controlled Soviet Empire. In that way, Russia is there, but Soviet Union is no longer there. That was because of the contempt shown to basic universal kind of values of democracy, not British values, not American values, universal values. Universal values in the sense of water, of the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, that kind of universality. That cannot be defined by patriotism of one kind or another. So what Starmer is doing against Corbyn, Starmer doesn't understand, because Starmer is essentially an idiot. I mean, Corbyn is an idiot, but Starmer is a different kind of idiot, because Starmer is an instrument of all the forces and all the powers that don't want the ideals of the Labour Party to be practiced in the government. The founding ideals, let's say, not the ideals of Tony Blair or Neil the Crook Kinnock. I mean, the Labour Party has never been allowed to establish itself by democratic means, by democratic leadership, democratic organization, democratic mobilization, and the kind of tinkering with the process of establishing that, which has been precluded, which has been hampered and obstructed. I mean, the people like the SWP wonkers, Socialist Wonkers Party, who want pedophiles and sex with children and all the other things, and who actually allowed rapists in their ranks to get away. These fiddlers are no match to solid organization of democratic activists in the Labour Party itself. It has never happened. Such mobilization that should have taken place has not taken place ever in the history of the last, well, let's say in the last 100 years. In 1921, they had in the East End of London the Poplar councillors. Poplar councillors who stood up for the ratepayer poor constituents and stood up against the conservative regime in the country 100 years ago in 1921. They ended up in prison. Can you imagine? That is the only event of that nature. The actual elected councillors risked jails and went to jail by standing up for their electors. Never happened again. And this happened in Tower Hamlets, where the KHOODEELAAR campaign had to fight a 7-year battle against the council, which is situated actually in Poplar. I mean, the headquarters situated in Poplar itself, Blackwall Tunnel, East India on the Dockland Light Railway. The council, Tower Hamlets Council, of let's say 2003, when the KHOODEELAAR campaign was conceived, and ever since, is beyond recognition. It's not anything like what the popular councillors in 1921 were like or were thinking of. Tower Hamlets Council is a synonym for corruption, criminality, backwardness, racism, and worse. And the Fleet Street papers that are today, Sunday, the 28th of November, kind of engaged in looking for any excuse to not talk about the massacre that took place in the Channel on Wednesday last week. Have nothing about the role of the Tower Hamlets Council, let alone of any other councils. And yesterday, in the financial crimes, Camilla Cavendish had a long piece about well, she didn't call it massacre, but she referred to the deaths of these people in the Channel. And the list of excuses that Camilla Cavendish peddled in her ignorant piece, the list included a litany of lies collectively for local councils, which she said were overwhelmed by the demands put on their resources by asylum seekers and refugees. And Cavendish, who has got direct access to the inside of the establishment, let's say, is not somebody that would write that kind of stupid piece against the migrants if she hadn't got clearance from her political masters and operators and handlers inside the government, inside the state. So what they're saying, through the likes of Cavendish, they're also retailing through the likes of Dominic Cummings. There is a air of brazenly rejecting the obligations, international legal obligations that the UK is under to honor asylum seekers, to protect them, to safeguard them. And Starmer is silent. Think about that. If it were a football match, let's say, you could easily say that for an entire period of the last, let's say 18 months or 2 years, Johnson has been failing and fouling up and that his goalkeeper has been completely all over the place. Despite that, Starmer has been failing to score a single goal. It's an open post, the goal post, if you like. Starmer has chosen not to score. That's what has been happening. And as we said yesterday, as I said before, that there is this 1951 Refugee Convention, which Camilla Cavendish did mention, but she didn't actually support it. Now let's put it this way. When the so-called, well, it's a European war, but let's say the general kind of description is the World War, Second World War. When it ended, and the evidence was immediately available of the nasty atrocities that the Nazis were wreaking and were engaged in causing, the instant kind of response was to set up a more rigorous international body than had been the case with the previous attempts. And the United Nations was founded. And the first declaration, the founding declaration of the United Nations, was to resolve solemnly never to let that happen again. And it was a good thing, it was universally kind of accepted, that determined pledge. But the resolution of the United Nations, founding resolutions of the United Nations, have not been carried out. I mean, if you look at the behavior of the current incumbent in the post of Secretary General, whom I have called António Guterres, is a Portuguese former Prime Minister. António Guterres. He's a racist, he's deeply careerist and corrupt. Same things I had said about the Egyptian Boutros Ghali, and I said about the Ghanaian Kofi Annan, and I could say about the Burmese one, U Thant, who was in post before them. What has happened with the exception of Dag Hammarskjöld, the Swedish one that was massacred in Africa? All the incumbents in the post of the United Nations have behaved as bureaucrats rather than as the supporters in action of the aims of the United Nations. There is a very big difference. And all the world's crises today can be tracked down to the fact that the person who has been in post at whatever time at the United Nations has betrayed the objects of the founding objects of the United Nations. Otherwise, after these people being massacred in the Channel, the United Nations should have come into action immediately. And the action should have included the United Nations pointing out how many of the treaty obligations that the UK and France have been under have been broken by UK and France in the last 2 years. The image of the refugee or the asylum seeker, the image mentally pictured in the minds of the people, imprinted in the minds of the people targeted for this kind of brainwashing. The image has been that these are the most unwanted, undesirable people on the face of the earth. As you can see, this girl, 24-year-old Kurdish girl that was absolutely besotted with her boyfriend or fiancé, and he didn't even know until the last minute before she boarded the dinghy that she was on his way. I mean, what kind of undesirable is that girl? And what kind of undesirable is the mother with her 3 children that died as well? I mean, increasingly these people's identities and details are emerging, but not fast enough. This is the kind of nightmare that should not be happening between the two of the world's most overly promoted civilized states. No mention of any of these aspects that I'm describing and outlining from Keir Starmer. For those who are new to this, or those who are watching this edition for the first time, I had dealings with Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. I mean, in 2011, I sent him communications detailing the various criminal activities happening in East London. And the reason I sent him those communications was to prevent the criminality damaging the rights and the prospects of the community in East London, as well as in the rest of the country. Not one, I think about a dozen or so communications with serious details of the crimes being committed. Now, this was the man in post of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the organization that actually makes the decision as to what crimes are being prosecuted or not through the courts. And the least he could do was to acknowledge the communications, but he didn't. Where do you go? I have experience of everything, everyone that, well, every platform that happened to be part of the diagnosis that I'm making. As I said about John Slow and that singer, I mean, it's not just an academic kind of look at the newspapers and their failures and their omissions and their racism and their backwardness. It's on a personal, individual, empirical level that I'm engaged in identifying the shortcomings and in identifying the criminal collusion and complicity by the media with the state and others. And taking into account all the evidence every day, 24 hours, I'm saying that Keir Starmer is dead, politically, of course. And that he has murdered the Labour Party, politically, of course. And there is nothing in the Conservative Party which is full of scum that society can expect for the protection of the values that people need. I mean, to use the phrase that Jeremy Corbyn was muttering, not the few but the many. The many are not being represented in the actions, in the decision making, in the analysis. So there is this mindset being made worse about the most decent, most dignified, most liberating concepts that came to be included in the founding efforts for the United Nations. Everything that the United Nations stands for, I mean, in the founding statements, that is something that human beings and states had fought for a very long time before this happened. Fairness, due process, rule of law, equality before law, and all those things. And yet, the most offensive, abusive occupant in the history of the UK state, as the advisor to the government, advisor to the Prime Minister, Dominic Cummings, is now back on the platform demanding the scrapping of the Human Rights Act, which is not even the full, it's only a part of the United Nations inspired, United Nations based aims for the states. The European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights, etc., are not even fully there. There is this legal kind of excuse, what is called derogation, to refuse to implement some provisions is called derogation. And even the derogation excuses don't apply, because the main excuses, the main reason, the main, quote, legal excuses for derogation, or for asserting derogation, or for citing derogation, concern the possible threat to national security. If there is a national security that may be hampered by the implementation of a certain article, then that possibility can be cited as the reason for not implementing that article. That is called derogation. But when it comes to saving innocent people's lives, how can that be a reason to say that scrap the Human Rights Act? How can that be? That is as brazen and as stupid and as illogical and as dishonest as that. And yet, Starmer is silent. Now, Starmer carries with him the license. He's a licensed law trader, quote, barrister, which assumes that he knows the law, or he knows his law. He's not saying anything. And you've got thousands of other licensed law traders trading under license as lawyers, staying silent. And this is supposed to be not Soviet Union before 1989. This is supposed to be not Prague, 1968. That was under Soviet Stalinist occupation. The tanks came. And this is not supposed to be China, 1989, remember? Was it 91? Whenever Tiananmen Square happened, quote, the Fleet Street media absolutely kind of out of control, as they mentioned the Chinese lone protester against the tanks in the rolling in the Tiananmen Square. So what is stopping Keir Starmer from condemning Johnson and Johnson fronted cabal? What is stopping him? So let's recap. In the Fleet Street Papers today, Sunday, there is nothing that I have said should happen. There is no condemnation of Johnson, no condemnation of Starmer. There is no condemnation of the fact that both UK and the the France are in open, brazen, kind of unconcealed denial of their obligations as states to safeguard refugees and asylum seekers. And as I said in January 1992, in my broadcast on the slot that followed the Channel 4 news slot, news as the slot, that was the slot called slot. I said that the impact on the population of the Western countries of any large-scale arrival of refugees or people seeking refuges would be very difficult to contain and deal with. And the best way and the only way to contain and deal with that would be for the Western countries to help secure stability, democracy, and civil liberties in the countries from where these people were forced to seek refuges in the West. 29 years ago, I said that, and I have been periodically referring to this and updating on my prediction. The United Nations has known about this because this has been on the broadcast, mainstream television news broadcast that I presented. I wrote and presented this. So why has the United Nations not been saying it themselves? I mean, when the environmental catastrophe hit the southern coastal areas of Bangladesh on the 30th of April, 1991, I organized an event, just a symbolic event. It wasn't, of course, comprehensive because I shall come to the other factors in a minute. I organized an event, a kind of gathering at what was then the Whitechapel Art Gallery. It has changed now. It was bad enough then, the art gallery itself, the bureaucratic control of the Whitechapel Art Gallery, Whitechapel in East London, Tower Hamlets. It has become even worse. It was bad enough then, but it is worse now. But one of the things that I had hoped that would create would be awareness. Awareness of the environmental kind of impact that countries like Bangladesh would be faced with. That was 1991, remember? 30 years ago. And I subsequently organized, within a few days of the cyclone that had hit Bangladesh on the 30th of April 1991, I had organized a project called BD 2001. That was 10 years before the calendar 2001. And from the platform that I created called BD 2001, I conducted communications with the United Nations, both their disaster-related operations in Switzerland, in Geneva. And I also contacted the various embassies, diplomatic missions, situated in the USA and other countries on behalf of the state of Bangladesh. And I set out various investigative queries, and I published or posted to them the way, a blueprint as to how future water-related disasters hitting Bangladesh, the impact of that could be reduced significantly, etc., etc. And I set out the things that happened later, but it was my original idea to create very lightweight vessels to rescue people ahead of any impending cyclone or similar. So what I did was many times in excess of what the United Nations official bureaucracies were doing at all. So if they spent billions of pounds worldwide since that happened in the last 30 years, the benefit of what my suggestion, my prescription, let's say, were higher than anything that the United Nations bureaucracy created for the people of Bangladesh and for people of other countries that have been in connection with the implementation of the program. So it was my ideas. So why am I referring to that? First of all, it is a fact. And secondly, the various bureaucrats that were in posts in the United Nations in Geneva and the various diplomatic couriers in the name of Bangladesh that were situated in Washington, in London, in other countries, they were not responding to the dynamics that I created with BD 2001. And they were not acknowledging in any way that can be mentioned the very original and very real program that I set out. So when this COP26 in Glasgow disappeared without any real kind of agreement on protecting the planet, and the protection actually affects the future of Bangladesh itself because of the location. Bangladesh is particularly vulnerable to sinking, and it is sinking. The reason is that the United Nations, remember what I started this part or segment with, the United Nations is a dead bureaucracy. The United Nations is not run by people who are intellectually alive, let alone environmentally alive. Think about that. And that is proven by the fact that the United Nations bureaucracies, there are several bureaucracies that actually kind of relate to the massacre that happened in the Channel. One is the humanitarian, another the environmental. And the other, of course, is the key task of the United Nations to secure peace, because it is the presence of the wars that contribute to the people being unable to live in their countries. most people who are refugees, I'm not saying every single one, because I'm not looking at a list, but statistically, the demographic kind of assessment is that most people who are forced to seek refuges and asylum are victims of lack of peace and civil kind of rights in their own countries. So that is something that the United Nations should be or should have been talking about these last few days. Again, in light of the massacre of the people in the channel, but it hasn't been. Now, this picture of this liar, congenital liar, I mean, only of course after he's out of number 10 Downing Street, because that will happen, but will the details of every single appearance by this liar will emerge. But we can't kind of wait for those details to emerge to know that he is unfit for purpose. As I said about the American writer who visited the then East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, in the 1950s and wrote his book and published it in the 1960s. Again, I mean, his name is not immediately before me, but I can check and update on that particular aspect later in due course. But the point of referring to that particular writer, whether I can name him or not at the time, is that one aspect of his book, as a let's say as an observer, as a correspondent, as a journalist, as a universally definable journalist, let's say, that dealt with the fact that every single official that he kind of consulted or visited or examined or watched, every person who was making a decision, to him came across as a liar or as unfit for purpose. And he said that that is the overwhelming evidence of the behavior that I witnessed. And yet, these people are liars and deniers and dishonest and other things, he said, and not fit for purpose. And yet the fact that the country was running, whatever the level of efficiency, the fact that the country was running, despite the fact that so many people in positions of decision making were liars and unfit for purpose and dishonest, must be because there is a God. I mean, he didn't say that he believed in God. What he said was that visiting Pakistan at the time in the 1950s, he found that most of the Pakistanis in positions were liars and dishonest people and unfit for purpose. So he said that despite all of that, the country seems to be working. And that must be because there is a God who is running the country. Not in the pious, religious sense, but he said that there was an influence, overwhelming influence, that is running the country. So the brainwashing that they're doing today, Sunday, the 28th of November 2000, 21 includes, of course, the promotion of the idea that somebody like George Clooney being 60 matters. Who does it matter to? So the headline is, it's an interview, byline to somebody called Jonathan Dean interview. And the main splash heading to this piece is, I was on the ground thinking it's the last minute of my life. After surviving a horrific motorbike crash, turning 60 and spending lockdown with his children, George Clooney faced up to his own mortality. In a revealing interview, he talks fame, failure, and his future. Now, this piece is about Clooney's domestic life and all, etc., etc. But there is an obscenity about putting him there. That needs to be kind of debunked. Instead of promoting somebody like Clooney, there should be recording the lives of people who are not famous and who are not rich and who are not married to Amal Alamuddin, the woman who was listed as the sexiest barrister by a couple of American entrepreneurs who actually did the job of being pimps. Because Amal Alamuddin only met Clooney after that exhibition, that she was the sexiest barrister going. Clooney must have targeted her after that. And the promotion of Clooney is always made by mentioning his wife, as I said, who is rated as the sexiest kind of barrister, female, etc., etc. But there is nothing in the publicity about her anywhere, not just this piece, but anywhere else, there is nothing that shows that she has fought a single case on behalf of people who can't afford the fees of the licensed law trader, let alone that she has actually successfully challenged the corruption that dominates the English judiciary, which is what the identity of the English judiciary is. Because these people that have been massacred, I'm saying these people because I still don't know the names of these people. I only know the names that have been mentioned of the 5 so far. One, the 24-year-old Kurdish young female that has been given more publicity than the mother and her 3 children. But most of the victims of the massacre have not been named or photographed in the media or anywhere. So these victims of the massacre, let's say, in the channel, they have been victims, all of them, including the young woman who only told her fiance based in the UK that minutes before she got on the fatal dinghy that she was on her way. Why would she risk death, or why would she take that journey? Answer is legal. That is to say, although there is law, the Human Rights Act that Dominic Cummings wants to scrap, it's not just Dominic Cummings actually. What Cummings is doing now in this week is resumed his role as a kind of colluder with Boris Johnson. That's what he's doing. So the quote advice by this evildoer, Dominic Cummings, he ceased to be evildoer for a short period, but he has resumed his role as the Satan, advising the Congenital Liar. He is saying that, and his main advice for Johnson is nothing to do with governance, nothing to do with international obligations, nothing to do with ordinarily understood rights of people, but to capitalize, overcapitalize, and overexploit again the dimness and the stupidity of the little Englanders. That's the actual fund of votes that Johnson wants to exploit at the next general election. And that's what Cummings is doing. That's, let's scrap the Human Rights Act. What does the Human Rights Act actually say in this kind of, in the form that it is? And it's called Human Rights Act 1998. That was the year after Tony Blair got in. And it says the introduction. In this act, the Convention rights means the rights and fundamental freedom set out in the Article 2 to Article 12 and 14 of the Convention, and then Articles 1 to 3 of the first protocol, and Article 1 of the 13th protocol, as read with Articles 16 to 18 of the Convention. Those articles are to have effect for the purpose of this Act, subject to any designated derogation or reservation as to which see sections 14 and 15. Remember, I described derogation in context at the beginning of this particular edition, so I've already dealt with that. The Secretary of State may order make such amendments to this Act as he considers appropriate to reflect the effect in relation to the United Kingdom of a protocol. In subsection 4, protocol means a protocol to the convention which the United Kingdom has ratified or which the United Kingdom has signed with a view to ratification. Now, what all of this is referring to in the word convention is the European Human Rights Convention. And as I said, even before reading this today, I said at the beginning that this was already an watered down kind of version, the Human Rights Act, watered down version of the European Convention on Human Rights or for Human Rights, because they keep changing the title from time to time. And what I say and assert is that the Fleet Street papers and the BBC and the rest of the broadcasting counterparts remain corrupt in their silence about the human rights obligations of the state. And the human rights obligations of the state, United Kingdom as a ratifier in common with the other states within the framework of the European Convention, that the European Conventions actually have been broken by the United Kingdom. Think about that. Which is why Cummings wants to get rid of the Human Rights Act. Now, if France had done something that could warrant the description or reporting that the French government had actually broken any law, international law, then you could guarantee that that would be featured as the front page splash on the Sunday papers. But there is nothing about the dishonest clamor that is being kind of engineered by Johnson-fronted cabal by bringing back into the platform the very Dominic Cummings that accused Johnson of being an instrument of Kerry Simmons when Johnson effectively sacked Cummings. So what the Sunday papers are doing, say for example, this one is the Sunday Mail on Sunday. Look at this. This is a complete lie. The Mail on Sunday is saying that somebody is, let's see who they are naming there or describing there as the blob. Civil servants have blocked the word Christmas from efforts to avert a winter COVID crisis, as the fear it would offend minority religions. The ban, detailed in emails leaked to the Mail on Sunday, was revealed as Boris Johnson announced tighter travel restrictions and new rules on masks in a bid to limit the spread of the new Omicron variant. Ministers had also planned a publicity blitz, telling students to get tested before returning to their families using the slogan, "Don't take COVID home for Christmas." But it was vetoed by cabinet officials. The move sparked a row over wokeism in the civil service, which has been disparagingly nicknamed the blob by critics, with one Muslim Tory MP branding the ban ridiculous. Now, notice that. I mean, one Muslim Tory. I mean, you couldn't get it worse. Muslim and Tory. These are conflicting kind of things. Two concepts, Muslim and Tory. An MP. These three don't go together, but they have managed to find them together. The Daily Mail. Muslim, anti-Muslim Daily Mail. Last night, the Prime Minister threw winter travel plans into chaos by announcing that every traveler arriving in the country must self-isolate until they can produce a negative PCR test, etc., etc. Now, let's scroll back visually, let's say, to see who this Muslim Tory MP is. Can we find him? Right, here is the Muslim MP. They said his name is Saki Bhatti, the Conservative MP for Meriden. Said, as a Muslim, I find it ridiculous we can't enjoy this special time of year. I look forward to showing my new son his first Christmas tree. The idea you can't mention Christmas is completely ridiculous. It's a time to celebrate, whatever your background. It's part of the British culture I love. And so on. This idiot has been recognized not only as a Muslim, but as a conservative Muslim MP. And this idiot, I never heard of. That's why I'm having to look up on him. Let's see what says Saqib Bhatti, yeah? And this criminal has been given, oh my God, he is a real moron. So he is described as the Bhatti is of Pakistani ancestry. He's an accountant by profession. In 2018, he became the president of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, becoming the youngest person and the first Muslim to hold the post. Now, what on earth has that got to do with them being Muslim, you moron? Now, this idiot is stated here that he is a Brexiteer. And he argued that the European Union policy prevented immigration from South Asia. and that leaving the European Union would make it easier. Now, if he did say that, then why is this criminal been silent after the massacre of the migrants on Wednesday? Which means that they have morons like him standing for kind of safe seats. Like this was a seat held by Caroline Spellman, but when she resigned or stood down, the Brexiteers chose this moron. So what is happening with the congenital liar, Boris Johnson, being in the post as so-called leader? Either the Mail on Sunday, which is the spiritual kind of extension of the agenda, which is personified and embodied by the congenital liar Johnson. Now, here we are just shifting slightly onto the treatment of this liar, Amal Raja, another ethnic individual, broadly speaking of the same age groups. Now, Amal Rajan suddenly switched his newspaper support to the Tories so that David Cameron would go to its owner's birthday party. Now, this is too complicated a headline for people who don't know the inside stories of the media to understand immediately. This is Amal Rajan. I mean, Amal Rajan is not fit to be anything to do with the media, the politics at all, and yet he was appointed as BBC's media editor. Now, the Mail on Sunday is saying that Rajan has enraged the royals with his BBC documentary, now a tantalizing quest from his days as a Fleet Street editor. Now, he was not a Fleet Street editor. He was a mental slave employed by a crook called Evgeny Lebedev. Lebedev. Evgeny Lebedev is the son of a Russian spy, quote, retired. And Evgeny Lebedev is so shameless in his pursuit of ingratiations with the likes of Cameron, Johnson, etc., that to detail the incidents of his ingratiation and slavery and corruption, it would take a whole edition of this program. So we just summarize in the words that I have just used. Okay, so this is the start of the item about Amal Raja. Shameless moron. It was an editorial volte-face that confounded the Independent's left-wing readership. Why did editor Amal Rajan suddenly swing his newspaper behind David Cameron 2 days before the 2015 general election? A senior political source has claimed to the Mail on Sunday that Mr. Rajan, now a rising star at the BBC, had agreed to support the Conservatives if Mr. Cameron agreed to attend the birthday party of his proprietor, the Russian businessman Evgeny Lebedev. Mr. Lebedev turned 35 the day after polling day, and Guardian reported that Mr. Cameron had attended the party to celebrate. Mr. Rajan, who has faced controversy in recent weeks over an explosive BBC documentary which prompted the royal family to threaten to boycott the corporation, made history as the first non-white Fleet Street newspaper editor when he was appointed in 2013 at the age of 29. Now that is an outrageous stupidity. Non-white Fleet Street newspaper editor means nothing. He was a mental slave. It was not his non-white kind of identity or background, but his servility to Lebedev. He's a crook, a former advisor. He must have done anything that the BBC needed for him to be given the job that he has been given, or the jobs that he has been given by the BBC so far since he joined the BBC. A former advisor and confidant to Mr. Lebedev, Mr. Rajan is tipped as a frontrunner to replace BBC political editor Laura Kunzberg. Now, Laura Kunzberg, we have edited her name to be Konsberg, K replaced by C. Konsberg is an extension of the Conservatives, which is what she is. The source pointed out to this newspaper, that is the Mail on Sunday, that in the months before the 2015 election, Amal Rajan's Independent, the newspaper, had been highly critical of the Conservatives' record in the coalition government. A front page story on 4th of April, 1 month before the general election 2015, revealed that in a private Whitehall meeting to discuss the coalition's priorities, a senior Conservative minister had told a Liberal Democrat cabinet colleague, "You take care of the workers and we will take care of the bosses." A blistering editorial on the same day declared, "The Conservatives have misread the national mood, again showing that they do not reflect Britain as once they did." It added, "The plain fact is that the Conservatives have misread the national mood again, and it is depressing their electoral appeal. The Tory leadership looks and sounds a little too public school, a touch too smug, and a bit too sympathetic to business vested interests." Now these words apply equally to Lebedev, because he is a product of public school and he was inserted into the public school system by his father Lebedev Sr. as part of the program of infiltration, let's say, social, cultural, political infiltration. And Lebedev is shamelessly infiltrating. So what happened was that on the 6th of April 2015, the Independent criticized the Conservatives, and on the 5th of May, the day before the election, or on the day of the election, it changed completely and supported the Conservatives. And the reason why this happened was because, according to this piece, Rajan had got Cameron to agree to meet Lebedev. This is the picture of Lebedev there with Cameron. And the grinning moron there. And what this piece is saying effectively is that Amal Rajan is rising within the BBC. Now, So the corruption of the United Nations and corruption by the United Nations bureaucracy is so phenomenal that to take account of or publish a full account of the corruption via the United Nations would take the length of several programs like the KhoodeelaarTV television channel. Now, I think on this edition, we are now just over 2 hours since we started, and we shall be continuing in later editions. So this son of the actress and now former MP, Dan Hodges, is one of the nastiest racists that has been given the platform by the Daily Mail group, who is literally poisonous. I mean, instead of devoting this piece to a discussion of the various issues that affected the people who were massacred and affected the decisions to get on the dinghy, he is inciting racist hatred, Brexiteering hatred, and dismissing the massacre as, let's find the, yes, he's talking about a racist conservative, and he's talking positively, favoring him. A normally rock-solid conservative seat it's Bexley and Sidcup. That is where by-election is due to be held as a result of the death of James Brokenshire, who has died. So Bexley, Sidcup, Old Sidcup and Bexley, he's describing as a normally rock-solid Conservative seat. I have been told Tory High Command is becoming increasingly nervous that a combination of sleaze, the migrant crisis, and disillusionment with Boris could see their 18,952 majority cut dramatically. And there is a picture of two Brexiteers dressed in armor, in English armor, Little English armor. That's what it is. It's not British, it's Little English. Richard Tice and Nigel Farage. And this is full of, this son of Glenda Jackson's. Glenda Jackson was a Labour MP, of course. He's forever looking for excuses to sort out at the opponents of the Conservatives, opponents of Brexit, and opponents of racism. And there is nothing in the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror or the Sunday People or the Guardian or the Observer, because these are the titles that could be expected to show awareness of how dangerously irresponsible, illegal, criminal the Daily Mail group is and has been. There is nothing in the papers, in the Mirror, in the Sunday People, in the Observer, which is Guardian owned, like a Guardian controlled, about the issues that we have been talking about here, about the illegalities, the breach of international law, and the plain falsehood. So we shall be talking on all of these issues in updates as an original kind of development in due course. Let's conclude this one. 10 minutes to 10 minutes to the hour, that is 13. So 1850 now. So it's 10 minutes to the hour, 1900 hours GMT.